And today I'm like super pumped because I got Santiago to join us for 1 hour. I didn't expect him to because he's a really busy person, and I think it's an extremely valuable 1 hour for all of you guys because, of course, you have access to all the information on the internet about college admissions, and we've talked about it a bunch, but the opportunity that you have today is talk to somebody who actually makes these decisions for a living, right? Like Santiago gets paid to do this, to decide on your life, on your destiny. Okay, it's not that dramatic, but it is a pretty important job and there's a lot of responsibility, but it also means you can hear from the source. You can hear from somebody who actually knows how this thing works from the inside. Internet is full of information, but not all of the information is accurate. So I'm really excited to hand it off to Santiago for his intro, and yeah, take it away.
All right, and cut me off whenever you need to, Ali. So everybody, my name is Santiago Ybarra, and I am currently the Director of Admission at Pitzer College, which is a small liberal arts and science college located in Los Angeles County in California in the United States. This is my second admission job. My first was at the alma mater that Ali and I share, Pomona College, where I did 9 years and left as Associate Dean of Admission. They're similar colleges in that they're small liberal arts in California, all in the same city, but they're very different in terms of how we process selectivity. So I think for anybody applying to colleges in the United States, you have to understand that our system allows for a wide range of flexibility, right? It's not like you just take the exam and then that tells you what level of college you can get into. We are allowed to apply many other metrics. And so that's really where this conversation comes into play. It's not an easy process. It's not a process where you can put together one application and send them everywhere and think that you're just going to be successful, right? If you're applying to Stanford, you don't want to use the exact same application that you're applying to New York University or the University of Southern California. We all have very different values and we're all going to interpret things in different ways, even though we might be asking for the exact same documents. You want to really edit them within each category. At Pitzer and at most private schools, colleges in the United States, we use the common application. So, and that is just an internet copy. There is no hard copy anymore. They've done away with that. So you have to log on to the internet and submit the common application. It is no different for international students, although there might be some extra components that you are asked for. The common application, and most schools do it this way, we read cover to cover. So the documents that I'm going to describe are the actual documents that will actually, the order that we read them in. So the first one is actually just the common application itself. It's going to ask some very basic questions: your name, date of birth, contact information, information on your parents and their education, if they have any. This is where you get to tell us whether you're submitting an application fee or not. There's a lot of confusion, I think, on this one. Every school allows you to submit an application waiver. You do that through the common application itself. So instead of paying a fee, for us it's $70 US dollars, you go in and select from a list of reasons why the fee is a hardship for you. We don't really check on that. It's honor code. So if you don't think that you can pay $70 or whatever the fee is for the schools, please just request that waiver. It's easy enough for us to process. The common application is going to ask you for a list of activities. This is really important that you fill out for several reasons. And I'll talk about a resume as well. But because this is kind of the first thing that we see out of biographical information for you, we really want to see things that you're active in. US colleges are expecting you to be a student, but we're expecting you to make it a lively place to live as well, right? We talk about community a lot at colleges and universities. So we want to know, are you a soccer player? Are you going to be joining a rock band? Are you going to be in the debate team? Whatever your passions are, this is what we want to see. I will say for international students, it's probably a good idea to also submit a resume, but here's the tip. Because we're used to reading the Common Application and its format, resume should follow that format, right? Because Common App is going to tell me what type of activity, like is it work? Is it educational? Is it volunteer work? Is it athletics? And then it's going to tell me what that activity is. International students, you might have some phrasing or acronyms that I'm just not familiar with, right? MUN is probably pretty universal, Model United Nations, but there might be some other things that I just don't get. So you really want to explain what those are to us. Common App is pretty limited, so I would say that's where the resume comes in. But the Common App is also going to tell me what years you were active in this activity. So was it senior, junior, sophomore, and freshman? So 9, 10, 11, 12 are equivalent years in the United States. For how many hours a week, for how many weeks, and then was it a academic year activity or was it something you did in the summer? So your resume, if you're submitting one, really should be formatted in that way, because that's how my eye is trained to read when I'm looking at applications, right? It's not like a job resume. So just be mindful of that. Next thing that we're going to read is your personal statement. This is a Common Application question that you will most likely submit to all US colleges that you're applying to. So it is really your opportunity to tell us about yourself. For some reason, when I do these panels, we do a lot of essay panels, we always have to emphasize that this is a personal essay. It's about you. One of the biggest mistakes a student can do is really talking about their mentor or their grandparents, somebody that inspired them, and kind of leaving it there. And often a comment from us application readers will be like, wow, we really want to admit your grandmother, right? We haven't learned about you. And so while it's really great to have a mentor and maybe start an essay as the base, if it doesn't come back around to you, that's not a solid essay. An essay is going to be about 650 words. What I present to the committee is a sentence or two. So share your essay with somebody, a friend, a parent, a mentor, and ask them to summarize it for you in 1 or 2 sentences. And if that's not what you were going for, you probably want to go back to that essay. The other hint I always really like to say is, don't try to outsmart me in the essay. If I need to break out a dictionary or the SAT catalog word, that's not a good essay. It's slowing me down. It should really just be a flowing essay, like a conversation. I want to hear your voice, right? I want to pretend we're talking through this essay. There are many times that I've read an essay 2 or 3 times and being like, wow, this student must be so much smarter than me. And by the 3rd time I get to it, I'm like, no, they're just not really a strong writer in this sense, right? It's not an academic essay in that reason. The other tip, this one's not necessarily my tip, but one I hear from a lot of colleagues is don't be depressing in the essay. Like you don't really want to have a downer. I don't know that I completely agree with that statement, because I think a lot of people are going through different situations and it could be very important to them. You could be applying from a place that's just not really, the country itself is not in a good situation. I think you do need to have sort of a silver lining with that, right? You always want to talk about how you've grown, how you think you'd benefit now that you've had this experience, how you've been more resilient. You're never really going to get an argument from us to admit you because we feel sorry for you, right? We're gonna because you have had those challenges and you were able to overcome and you learned something. So that's really big. I think my take always on these essays is teach me something. This is actually why I think reading international applications is one of the best things for us, because we get to learn a lot about places that we either haven't been to or don't know extensively. I remember this essay I read from a student from Florida once. He was Haitian, first generation to the United States, lived with his grandmother, his mother, and I think an aunt, and just kept talking about how as a male in a female-dominated family and Haitian culture really played it. And I don't remember the specifics, but I definitely remember feeling like I learned something about first-generation Haitian culture. You're applying to a college, so teaching me, I can then translate to saying, okay, that's what you're going to contribute to the classroom. That's what you're going to contribute to the residence halls and your peers here. So teaching is always going to be a big thing. Pitzer and my other college, Pomona, both require a supplemental essay. So this would be the next thing. This is where the college gets really specific, where, Pitzer has a set of core values, so we'll ask about that. The University of Chicago, it has my favorite application essays because they'll always ask something extremely random, like a ice cream question or something that's very quirky. I think when you look at schools, this essay should tell you two things. They should tell you the personality of the school and their values, and they should tell you how much fun you want to have with this essay, right? If it's like an MIT and it's a really hardcore STEM essay, that's what they're looking for. If it is U Chicago and they're looking for that quirky personality, go with it. Have fun with it as much as you want. If this essay, this is the one where if you replace, Pitzer with Stanford in this essay, that is so not a successful essay. And we read a lot of these. Even a first-year counselor is probably going to read about 1,000 essays in that year. So we're going to be able to really suss out whether you were paying attention to it being our essay. And of course, do every final check. It is amazing how many regular decision applications we get that it does say Stanford or Oberlin at the end instead of saying Pitzer. And in my mind, it's like, oh, you applied early decision and you didn't get in and you didn't even bother to swipe out the essay and do those final checks. Not only because we're selective, but I think also because at Pitzer, we are a school that looks at demonstrated need and financial need in making a decision. And when I'm thinking of our international students, a lot of them are getting the full award with no loans package, so $80,000. And it's a little bit harder if I have two very qualified students to be like, well, this one might also go to Grinnell versus this one really is interested in Pitzer and kind of kicked all the tires and researched us extremely well. So next, we are going to read recommendations from teachers. I would say, depending on the type of schools that you're applying to, that's what you should be mindful of who you select as recommenders. So if it's for us, a small liberal arts discussion-based college, a class where you are speaking up in class, right? A teacher that knows you to be verbose and to debate and to engage your peers. If it is more of that research school, maybe it is somebody that you've done research with. Definitely play to your strengths on that one. Transcripts. Transcripts are going to be required of everybody. I would say you want to contextualize your transcript if there have been some hardships that just won't be clear. Maybe COVID, technology issues that came up. If you see a pattern, your grades go up, your grades go down, whatever it is, give us context, but don't make excuses. Don't say, if this hadn't happened, I would have received top marks. You don't know, right? You don't know if that would happen, but for sure, tell us that something happened and it threw you off your game a little. It put a wrench in your plans. And so that context we want to know, but don't make excuses. Some of the basic things is maybe create an email account that's specific to college. We make fun of, some of the really creative Google accounts that you have. Like there is definitely a, honeybooboo2@gmail.com that we get. And it's not the end of the world, but it's just kind of like, that's telling you something and we can't really figure it out. But also because we will communicate with you about missing items. We will communicate to you about updates. So you want to have an essay that's sort of really secure. up to you if you want to use a like EDU account. You could run into issues if you are admitted and then you graduate from your secondary school and they shut off your email account. Then we don't have a way to communicate with you. So you want to have maybe something that's a little bit more permanent to you, and only this type of information goes in there. Dates. Most of our schools will be very flexible on deadlines, but not everybody will. Like the University of Michigan is notorious. If you don't get your information in by the deadline, they're not counting it. And that even means if your high school counselors don't get the information in. So I always have friends who work on the high school side who, you know, December 31st are quadruple checking that they submitted what they needed to, because otherwise the families that they work with are going to be devastated and they'll be hearing back from them. So deadlines, extremely important. Testing is going to be optional at almost all colleges in the United States for the next couple of years. That's the SAT and the ACT. Take a look at what the school reports for their exams. We call it the middle 50%. You know, is it 690 to 740? And that should give you an indication of whether you want to submit testing. Of course, any school that takes exams, if you're able to raise their profile so you have a 750, that's a good thing for them, right? But if you have a 680, you might be lowering their overall average. And in a test option scenario, maybe you don't want to submit that testing. I think for international students, the only other things is depending on the language of education, you might have an IELTS or a TOEFL, or in some cases a Duolingo exam that they will ask for, and a different financial aid form. Some schools use the ISFA, which is free, and some schools require the CSS profile for international students, which costs a fee. If you're submitting that, you may want to ask the colleges themselves if they'll provide a waiver for that exam. That's, I think, really the top of my do's and don'ts. I will say, when hopefully you'll have questions, or I can provide questions. I am a director of admissions, so I get to kind of say anything I want without worrying about somebody slapping my hand. So I do try to be very honest. I also know that I'm not necessarily the most comforting of people. So, you know, if you're coming and being, well, can I do this and can I have this excuse? I'm usually, no, the policy is this, and this is the reality. It is your application, so by all means, treat it the way you want to, and I think that authenticity comes through and will be appreciated by the right colleges. But, you know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you don't bother taking calc if you want to get into Caltech or Stanford, probably, right? So, yeah, with that, let's get to the best part, Ollie, the Q&A.
Excuse me, what do you mean by don't taking calc for the Stanford or Caltech? What do you mean?
So, though I've worked for many selective colleges, our criteria has been very different. When I worked at Pomona College, which at the time was, you know, in the like top 10 selective colleges or universities in the country, if you had not taken math up to the calculus level, you were not in the conversation, right? You were just, it was going to happen. You were not going to be admitted. There are going to be a lot of colleges, top tier colleges, that are like that. Pitzer is also very selective percentage wise, but we tend to put a lot of our selectivity in fit for our core values. And so, you know, pre-calculus for us is fine. You know, it's not a make or break if you make it to calculus or not. But that's going to vary by college. And in the United States anyway, I hear a lot of parents talking about the pressure to take really rigorous coursework across the board. And yeah, you know, if you want to go to Harvard, that is kind of the pressure that you have. And they're going to think that they're extremely rigorous and that you're going to need this preparation. But there are many colleges, you know, in the top 30s and the top 40s in the United States, rank-wise, who are, you know, who know good students are good students and you're going to be successful, and that having, you know, AP or IB across the board is not going to make or break somebody's success on our campus.
I think just maybe what's lost in translation is that the term calculus is not really common in the Uzbek education system. So calculus is where you study differentials and integrals, which is the highest level of math that you will typically get to in high school. But actually, some of you are at presidential schools, and I'm not sure what you get to do for your A levels in math. You might be doing calculus, or you might be doing something else. Certainly, when I was in the public school system, I know that in my 11th grade, which is the terminal grade, the equivalent of 12th grade in the US, I was taking calculus. So all of you should be because we have no option in Uzbekistan, so there's no option not to take a certain class. So all of you will be taking that in 11th grade, and then the ones in presidential school might be doing something even more advanced. I don't know.
Yeah, for things that you don't have options for, we're not going to hold that against you, right? If this is just what everybody does, we're not going to be deciphering at a great extent. But I think things like exams and A levels, you know, that's where schools will really distinguish themselves as far as how selective they want to be on that.
Cool. So to make this a little bit more structured, I know a lot of you have questions. So what I want you to do, guys, is raise your hand like so that I can see in Zoom that you have your hand raised. And then we'll go with whoever has their hand raised. I want to kick us off with maybe an easy question. Santiago, if I have a question that I don't have a clear answer to on Pitzer's website, should I email Pitzer, or is that not a good thing?
Yeah, no, you should definitely email us. So one thing I didn't talk about is demonstrated interest, right? This is something that Pitzer tracks. Some schools track it, some do not. It's a little bit of a controversy, I think, among colleges. That term means how many points of contact have you had with a particular college, right? And we used it as a way to gauge enrollment. If we admit you, what are the chances that you're coming, or have you applied to 80,000 colleges and we're just one of them, and you don't have the time. So if you email us, that's going to be part of your record. Like we're going to know how many times you've emailed us, how many times you've checked your status page on your application, and we take that as interest. But also, I think the email should clear things up for you, and in a lot of circumstances, it can be your point of contact with your application reader. So like when a student comes into our system, before the Common App or at the Common App, they get an email saying, this is your application reader. So, I have my own territory. So all those students then get my email and they can reply to it and say, I have these questions about the application or about the process. We have two jobs. One is, the term gatekeeper, where we're in the application process and we're reading the files and going to committee and deciding on who to admit and offer scholarships to. But before we get that, we are the counselors, right? So it is my job to counsel you best, not only through our process, but maybe through the higher education process in the United States. Like there are times, right, where I will tell you that we're not the right school for you. Like that, for what your goals are, I would not go through this process. And so I think it is a very good idea to email us if something's not there, or if you want to connect with students. We all have students who, either volunteer or work for us, and you can connect with them as well. Don't email me with 30,000 questions that are easily Googled on our webpage or the internet itself. Because again, we know who you are, right? We're tracking these emails, and it's just a little bit lazy. And frankly, when I get those emails, I probably just go to our website and copy and paste myself, right? Like, if you're going to be lazy in the questions, I'll be lazy in my answers.
Thank you. Yes, which is also why I asked you guys to prepare some questions that are not so easy to answer. So I see a hand. Usnadin, Agbarbek, you guys have a hand up.
Good day, Mr. Santiago. From the lot of interviews and blogs I've ever read about the admission process, the students say that the mood of, let's say, the reader, I mean, in which position or when they read. Okay.
I think I get the question. Is the question about how the mood I am in when I'm reading an application impacts the applicant and my summary of it?
And how do you, yeah, and how do you start, I mean, reading the applications? In my, like, will you start in an exact date, or just you will start whenever the application is received?
Yeah, I tend to wait until after our application deadline to read any files, because I want to give students the opportunity to submit everything by then, right? There might be some students who our deadline's January 1st. There might be some students who complete everything December 20th. I'm not going to start reading that application because there's still 11 days for you to send updates, do something else, submit a resume or a link to something. So I want to give you that opportunity. There are a few people that maybe started a little early just to get a jump on the process and then go back towards the end to look for updates. But yeah, I will say there's not going to be a benefit to submitting anything early. Like you're not going to get in because you submitted on December 25th. And if you all submit on 25th, that doesn't mean I'm reading you before I read somebody who submitted on January 1st. I prefer to read in groups. So, maybe I'll read all my files from Brazil in a day or two, or I'll read all my applications from one high school in a day or two, or the state, because then that way I can get my mind in that educational framework, right? I've never read Uzbekistan, but if I did, I'd have to spend some time trying to understand the system and the grading policies and all of that. And I'm going to leave my mind there and just read all my Uzbekistan files, and then, move on and figure out how to read Pakistan, right? And so we read mostly in that order. And just a quick thing on the mood of, how we are. I think we really try to be very professional, but I will say you can set the mood for this process, right? Like if you omit a lot of things on that list of extracurriculars and it looks very short, you've set the mood for me, right? You've set the mood for me being like, well, they don't seem that active. Probably not looking forward to a promising rest of the application with this thing already lacking. And then at the end, I get to your resume and it turns out you have all these other things, right? Well, you set my mood for not being too optimistic about the rest of this file. And then at the end, it turns out that you didn't complete a section as thoroughly as you could have. And now my mind's a little bit jumbled and I have to come back to it. So you can definitely set the mood, but I don't think I'd be too worried about my mood, because we're really doing this for your benefit, not for ours. And if I was really cranky, I don't think I'd read a file. Like we have the luxury of like, okay, do it all in one day or spread it out over 3 months, and our styles can be very different.
Cool. There's a question in the chat, so I'll read it. Some folks don't have a strong enough internet connection. So the question from our boss is, so basically he's asking if he needs to write about a weakness, whether it's an essay prompt or an interview question, what's the way to approach that kind of question?
I mean, I think in a lot of honesty, I think when I see these questions and I see the answers being like, my biggest weakness is perfectionism. Is this term transferable, it's a cop-out. It's kind of a way of you answering a circular question to say, well, they're asking for a weakness, but my strength is my greatest weakness, right? You're not really answering the question. We're asking it for a reason. I think whatever that weakness is, we want to know about how you're compensating for it, how you're adapting for it, or really like where you're playing to your strengths. For me in college, I think if I had gotten this question, I probably would have said writing, and that's why during my last year of high school, I doubled up on English courses to be able to really work on that before getting to college. But for you, if it's like self-confidence, we want to know that we are ready to help you through that weakness, right? That we have the resources for that, because we want you to stay at our college for 4 years, and we want you to have a degree. Not just for you, there's a very selfish reason. If you graduate, it helps our numbers. And I mean, if you get into the details of it, it ultimately helps our credit rating as an institution, which is crazy, right? But we want you to succeed if you come here. And so I think that question could just be, what do we need to be prepared for in order to help you through the system? None of us are perfect. I don't think anybody is looking for a perfect candidate. That's not very interesting. Perfection is not super interesting to read about in the application. That said, I will say, I would hope somewhere I'm also able to, maybe not in this question, this essay, but that I'm able to display my strengths, right? I don't care if you're weak in math. If you're strong in writing, then I'm going to say, well, okay, well, they might struggle a little bit over here in math and a requirement, but that's fine, because they're going to get their confidence back when they take that writing course. So I think for me, that's probably what it is, but be honest. I mean, I think we're all weak in different ways. And so I don't think you should be scared to have that out there. And yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think self-awareness is really important, and like I think it's a measure of how mature you are or how ready you are for university education. And part of how like I gauge self-awareness when even I interview people for a job over here at WhatsApp is I ask them the same question: what are you good at? What are you bad at? And some people who don't have a good answer to the weakness question, where I think like the answer is a cop-out, I think to me that demonstrates that they maybe don't have enough self-awareness. So I think that's the first one. And the second part is what you alluded to, Santiago, which is, what did you do about it? Like, did you do anything about it? Did you use your strengths to kind of help you in areas where you're weak? And that's also pretty cool to see.
This is a good question if you have self-deprecating humor, right? If you want to really embarrass yourself in this application, that can really be a good essay. And back to the mood question, gets us laughing, gets us in this place of like, this person's going to be really honest with their community about things that they're lacking in.
That's a really good point too. Honesty that you portray through that answer can then spill over into other parts of your application, because you set the mood for, hey, I'm pretty transparent here, so everything else I say is therefore also transparent. I don't see any more hands. Does anybody else have questions?
I had a question.
Let's go to Gulbahar. She just had her hand up apparently. I didn't notice it. And then Muhammad Reza will go back to you. Gulbahar, your question, please.
Hello, everyone. And my question is about essays. Well, I searched information how to write personal essay, and I tried to write my own personal essay too. My question is it the best way to use hooks to get the attention of admissions? I mean, is it okay to come up with a story to tell about ourselves, or should we tell that?
You muted yourself in the middle of that question. Should you do what? Okay, so the first part of the question was, is it okay to use hooks? And
Yeah. Well, I think she wants to ask a little bit later, but I do want to say, I think hooks, when we say hooks, we mean something else. I think when you're thinking hooks, you're probably thinking of like a good open line, right? Something to grab our attention and to like stand out and be memorable. At least for students in the United States, their biggest concern with their essay is they want to be unique and they want to be memorable. And I always say memorable is not always a good thing. Like I could remember you for bad reasons. And also I've been doing this 20 years, which means I have read hundreds of thousands of essays at this point. You're not gonna get me. You're not gonna get me with something I haven't heard either by reading it myself or by somebody in committee having read that. There's a good opening line is always a good opening line. It's not going to sustain an essay. I think authenticity definitely is more important and will ultimately serve you best in the process. You know, a shiny essay with hooks is a shiny essay with hooks that I probably forget about as soon as I get to the transcript, because there's no meat there. And honestly, it wastes a little bit of space. So if it's really related, awesome, it worked out for you. If it's forced, it's probably going to be very, very clear. I always use this example of a essay I once read, which was it was flowery in its language, right? It was very poetic and all of that used up a lot of space to say very little. And in my mind, I was like, wow, this essay was really long-winded. And when I got to the teacher recommendations, they backed that up. The student was just, very long-winded and had a lot of filler in the process. So, definitely be mindful of that. You want to get to the point. You don't really want to waste my time in the essay, I guess is the thing. You want to get to the meat of who you are and what you're going for. And again, I summarize it in 1 or 2 sentences. And I'm 100% not going to use the hook line as the summary of your essay.
yeah, you only have 650 words,
Thank
so
you.
use them wisely.
But may I continue? I googled some best essays in Google, and I saw some essays that is kind of life story, and they said it was the best essays in the admission. How can it be happen?
So I'll tell you what I've never done. Googled best essay for admission. We're all going to go through it with our own lens and figure out as we're there. And there's 2 reasons. I mean, I know you want to get into college and you want to do everything possible to put your best foot forward. But I have to really go back to authenticity. Do you want to be admitted to a college because you knew how to Google how to create a good essay? Or do you want to go into a college because you were yourself? And then you should have confidence that we know who you are and think that you're good for us, and that you know who we are and that you're good for us, right? You should get into Stanford because Stanford's right for you. You shouldn't get into Stanford because you Googled it, or you in the United States, you paid some independent college counselor to walk you through the process. That's just, that's not necessarily the right way. And also there is just no one good essay. Like your life story can be great. Again, I mentioned the one about the student from the first generation student from Haiti. You know, I read essays about students who come home to the police being in their homes because they live in a bad neighborhood and there were shootings, right? The trick there is it can't be about your neighborhood. It can't be that you live in a low-income area and there's gun violence. That doesn't tell me anything about you. And I'll just admit your whole neighborhood, right? So you really have to figure out how to center yourself in that essay. That's context around you, but that's not all of who you are.
Thank you.
I think pretty much everyone whose essay I've read from Uzbekistan talks about how they grew up in the ruins of the post-Soviet country of Uzbekistan and how difficult things are over here and how the education system is broken. And yeah, like Santiago is saying, you can say those things, but if you've said those things and you've used up the first paragraph, you've said nothing about yourself. You've described the place, and like Santiago might not be Googling about best admissions essay, but he can Google Uzbekistan. Like he can look up Uzbekistan in Wikipedia, so you don't have to tell him what kind of a country it is. You have to find things that are specific to you within that context.
I think I would like that if somebody started their paragraph with, if you don't know about Uzbekistan, Google it before you get to this essay. You know, I might like that. You know, when I say something about a lazy application, you just called me lazy for not knowing that. I'll be like, oh, I should do that. That's wise.
Cool, let's move to the next question. Mohammad Reza, do you still have one?
Well, I think you have already answered that question. The thing about when I was going over the niche, I have seen some schools that they do not require high school GPA, and it was kind of different thing for me. I mean, I haven't expected the school not requiring GPA because I think all of the schools required at least GPA to compare the applicants. And I would like to know what what it is about from you.
So we will try to get a GPA, but the thing with US systems is there are some set expectations, and then everybody branches out from that and just breaks their own rules. I have at least one high school in my territory in New York City that does not give grades. So my transcript is 38 pages of teacher evaluations. So I can't use a GPA for that. So we're going to have to be very adaptable. Like at any time I talk about Pitzer and what we require, there's always the what if this, and it's like, well, in that situation, we would waive that. You know, we have that amount of flexibility and autonomy in the United States to be able to work around that. So yeah, if the college doesn't require a GPA, it's probably because they're thinking that there's something else in the application that's just more important to them. Maybe it's the curriculum that you're taking, right? Maybe it is the testing at that point. But I would say, yeah, most schools will probably work around that.
Thank you.
I guess like with international students in particular, when you look at a student who didn't attend an international school that follows the IB or the A levels or any other kind of standardized program, how do you know how to evaluate their academic ability?
Usually a school might have a profile that kind of tells us, what percentage of students are getting what evaluation on the A levels. Sometimes we just take a leap of confidence in a list of where that school has sent students to in the past, right? If your students are going to Cambridge or St. Andrews, I should not really question that Pitzer's, you'll be equally successful and prepared for that. If not that, then it does become just more research for me and trying to figure out what these standards are, what the percentages are. Right, again, I read Latin America, South America. So an 80 by US standards would not be competitive in a transcript for us, but an 80 in Brazil is amazing, right? You're a top candidate. So it's my job to figure all those intricacies out. And I think we do it pretty well because it's our job. We also keep historical records. So if we do, we'll probably translate it to a US GPA based on, a 4.0 GPA. And we'll have historic record of everybody from that school or country who's applied and what their GPAs are, and whether they are successful students. If somebody has to drop out of Pitzer for academic reasons, we have that knowledge base now of what is a good GPA coming out of a specific location.
Cool. All right. I see a hand up. Asadbek?
Yes, hello. Is there any portal that you have an access to look for the students from particular school? Like, how do you know that one student got accepted into Harvard or Cambridge? Or they do declare, because it was really difficult to find any person from Uzbekistan, for example, studying at Harvard. How do you find that students?
Oh, that would be information that the high school itself would be telling me about in their profile if they have one. It's pretty common for high schools to have that if they are sending students overseas to universities, because it does tell us, like, okay, this is considered a top tier school, and so their top candidates are going to these elite universities. It's something that we look at here in high schools in the US. We have other metrics of measure for it, but basically, we can say that this is an underperforming school. So maybe like their top 1% of students are going to the elite colleges, or maybe this is a really well-funded school, whether private or public, and 20% of their students are going to the Ivy Leagues. Right, so immediately I have to recenter my brain. It's not just, okay, the valedictorian is the best, or, that there's not maybe a difference in the top 10% or the top 20% of a graduating class. So that's really our job.
But I also think this is problematic in Uzbekistan, where schools don't have the position of a college counselor, right? So there's nobody who would provide this kind of a report. So I think it's your job is, as students, your job is to coach whoever is writing your recommendation, the counselor recommendation letter. Maybe it's the director or the principal of your school. It's your job to explain to them what needs to be included in terms of the statistics or some basic information about what are the students from the school doing upon graduation, and where do you stack up in terms of the ranking, right? So you might have a 5 out of 5 GPA in a regular public school in Uzbekistan, right? But how do you compare to other students? Do most students get a 5 out of 5? Do 30% of the students get a 5 out of 5? Are you in the top 10 of your graduating class? So ask your principal or the director to include these things, because they don't know, they haven't done this before. You're probably one of the few students that they're doing it for. So it's on you to prepare them, to explain to them what they have to do.
And don't feel like you have to be the best, right? You don't need to be the best they've ever seen. There's a checkbox called one of the best in my career, right? Great if you are. good on you. If you cast your net wide enough to colleges, so you're looking exclusively at the United States, right? You don't need to go to Harvard to end up successful. In fact, you might be more successful by going to a school that nobody in Uzbekistan has ever heard of, right? It could be Skidmore or Rose College in Tennessee. And you're just right for them, right? Maybe it's not quite as academic. It's still hugely academic, but Harvard. And you do well there, that's going to set you up really nicely, as opposed to struggling at Harvard if it wasn't really the right place for you.
Let's go to Faris. You have a question.
Hi everyone, Mr. Ybarra. I've got a couple of questions, mainly regarding to extracurriculars. So when it comes to the things we do, should they also be connected to the or close to the values or the mission of the specific school? And my second question is, what if we put in some basic extracurriculars on Common App that may seem not so impressive in comparison to what the applicants from the US typically do or have. So I guess this is for now.
So one thing I didn't say earlier that I probably should have, when you go to the Common App and you list your activities, put the ones most important to you first, right? So that's where I'm really starting, kind of rank them when you list them. As far as whether they should be connected to the school, depends. I would say for Pitzer, yes, right? We're hugely involved in sustainability, social justice. So if those are things that I'm seeing in your extracurriculars, that's a strong argument for fit. I think there are many colleges in the United States that won't be quite as specific as Pitzer, right? They want to be a general liberal arts college, which is great as well. So for them, I don't think it matters if they don't have a lot of like a diplomacy or an ambassador program, but your main activity is Model UN. I think that at that point, they just want to see that you're active. I will say, if you're applying to some school that you're doing something, either Uzbekistan or your high school or you individually do it and the college does not, we're technically in the desert. So let's say you were hugely involved in a rowing or sailing team, and that was like really your passion. I'm going to give you credit for the amount of time and effort that you're putting into that activity. But if we don't have that, I might wonder why you would come to our school, right? If you have to give that up, or how you plan on still accessing that, or maybe creating that here, right? Like maybe you're okay with creating a club wrestling team if we don't have a varsity wrestling team. So it might throw some questions to me in the application, so you might want to explain those things. But otherwise, I think just being active is fair. If you have career goals, like we have a joint medical program, and I'm not looking for you to do shadowing of doctors, but they are. If you're not shadowing a specific type of doctor of osteopathic medicine, they're not going to be interested because they think that you don't have that experience. So you might want to start making those connections with either activities or an academic major, right? If I always use this point as well, like, maybe you want to be a doctor. If you're not doing well in the sciences at the secondary level, that's, it's probably not a thing for us. So I might still admit you, but I'm kind of wondering, when you realize you're probably not going to make it as a pre-med, what are the other things you're going to do, right? If you're an athlete, this is a big question always for me. You're a recruited soccer player. What happens if you're injured? What do you do? Where do you put that time? where do you still find joy in the process? So I would think about those things for sure.
I just want to say that this question is related to a question in the chat, which is about the why us supplemental essay. So I think that's probably the best place to expand on it, because the extracurricular section of the Common App is really just a bullet list, but the why us supplemental essay is where you can kind of tie these things and say, hey, I've been doing these things because these are my interests, and this program at Pitzer College or whatever college is really attuned to those interests, and that's what I want to pursue. The second part of the question, the second question that Faris asked Santiago, I think, is an interesting one. So in the US, students have access to a lot of resources. In Uzbekistan, they don't. So when you see these extracurricular lists of a student from Uzbekistan that perhaps don't look as impressive as somebody from the US or even any other developing country, where like even in India and China, you do have quite a few resources nationally that allow students to do things outside of school. So what would you recommend in that situation to a student who perhaps didn't have access to a lot of resources in high school?
Yeah, I guess I would argue that in the US, we do have a lot of structured extracurriculars, right? You show up at a high school and it's like, there's the Gay Straight Alliance, there's the Chicano Latino Student Affairs Office, there's the STEM program that you can be part of. So you can definitely be a joiner in the United States, and in other countries, that's not as easily the case, right? You may have to create your own things. Certainly in a pandemic, probably a lot more hustle to that. But I think we do want to see what you're able to do with the limited resources that have been available to you. It's going to be really hard for me to just imagine that you get to our campus and you take advantage of everything if you haven't already done the work in some way. Back when I used to read Africa, and I had a student who, there were no activities at the high school, but what he would do is he took his paper money and went to buy like a PlayStation somewhere, and then started getting arcade games, and then he would rent time for other young adults to come play his PlayStation at his house. Now, in the United States, I'd be like, so you play video games. I'm not getting how that's going to help the community. But in rural Africa, that's genius, right? That's like an entrepreneur establishing something for the community, but really also just figuring out a way. And it is hard. I have to say, it's work, but that's kind of what it takes to get $80,000 in scholarship, to know that you're that person.
Yeah. I want to be conscious of your time. There's one hand that's raised. Do you mind taking one more question,
No,
Santiago, before we wrap up? Okay.
I'm good.
Akbar Bek, go ahead.
Good day. My question is about the importance of essays. Can essays make a big change in application process? If, for example, if there are two applicants and one seems to be a better applicant in terms of academics and extracurricular activities, and at this point, can essays make a big change and impact on your decision and change your mind?
Yes, I think maybe more so to the bad degree than to the good, because I don't have my mind made up by the time I get to the essays, right? It's sometimes I do break it up, and maybe I start with the transcript and the extracurriculars, and I definitely have some sort of leaning as to, okay, this is an admissible student or not, but I'm definitely not fully on board to admit somebody until I get to the essays. So they are very important. We used to do this thing. We haven't seen one in a while, but let's say we have our essay prompts here, and this is the whole page that we get to read from your application, and this is what you wrote. Many counselors will look at this space and say, look at how empty that is, right? Again, that's effort. And you actually in committee don't even have to say anything. You just have to, can you go to the page, and they put it on the projector and you're like, ooh, look at all that empty space. All that space they could have used to tell us more about themselves. And frankly, that kind of just completely throws you out of the conversation. Or it doesn't answer the prompt, right? We ask about our core values and you talk about Dungeons and Dragons. It's just not, it's not gonna help you. A strong essay on its own is also not going to admit you. It might get me to email all my colleagues and say, you should read this essay. It's really good. It's fun. But it's not going to be an argument to admit you. It really is the holistic process. All the pieces really have to come together. They kind of all have to be strong, but I don't think they don't need to be perfection. Like if you have, for us anyway, if you have a lower grade in math, but everything else in the application was great, and the essay really showed me who you were, and I can envision you on campus and enjoying our education, then it's a strong essay. There was another question in there somewhere in the chat, Ali, about unique. We're not looking for unique. We're trying to form a community here. It was part of another question. I see you looking for it. We're building an entire community. And for us, it's about a little less than half of the students that we admit will actually enroll with us, right? So once you're admitted, it's your decision whether to come here or one of the other schools that you were admitted to. So I'm not really thinking that one for one you're coming, and then so, oh great, I got that very unique story, and now you're in the class. You could go somewhere else. So our job is to build the community around you. So we're never looking for like one thing. We're looking for similar things from similar people, because only 1 in 2 of you is going to come. So yeah, I wouldn't trust the unique thing to, it might get you into committee. It probably won't by itself get you into the class.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's wrap this up. One last thing, like one last plug I want to make is everybody should go and research Pitzer College, because when I was at Pomona, I actually took some classes at Pitzer and I had friends at Pitzer, and it's a really good school because nobody knows, like nobody outside of the US really knows about Pitzer. It's actually, if it's a good fit for you, it might be a really good opportunity to like add to your college list, because you're going to be unique for Pitzer. Probably like, I don't know, Santiago, how many applications from Uzbekistan have you seen in the last 10 years?
Probably I could count on one hand if I needed to count.
Yeah. So of course it's a liberal arts college, but even within the liberal arts spectrum, Pitzer is quite unique. So do your research, make sure it makes sense for you and what you want to do, and definitely if it does, you should apply. And
I would just add, I actually think it'd be really good to look at all 5 of the undergraduate schools in Claremont.
Yes.
Because if all 5 stay on your list, you're not doing your research right. We are liberal arts institutions, but we all have a slightly different take on that. I think if 2, maybe 3 stay on the list, you're probably fine. If all 5, you're approaching the college search completely wrong, and you want to recenter.
Yeah, and Harvey, Mudd, Scripps, Pomona, Claremont McKenna, and Pitzer, those are the 5 that Santiago is referring to. They're all completely different. Well, I guess like Claremont and Pomona might be the most similar, but the others are so different. Like
what do you mean by implying that if you are going for 5 in one area? I mean, what's
well, like Harvey Mudd is mostly an engineering school, right? They're mostly engineering, all STEM, computer science. Claremont McKenna is really into politics and leadership. Scripps is an all-women's college. Pomona is a little bit the catch-all because it's the founding member, so the traditional liberal arts experience. So if you want the traditional liberal arts experience, Pomona is your school. But if you're into hardcore social justice, Pitzer's your school. But if you're into leadership, Claremont McKenna is your school. You're probably not all of these things, right? And if you are and you want to continue to be all five, then maybe Pomona, even though they don't offer engineering. But if you just want to pivot to engineering, then Harvey Mudd's your school. And if you don't want to do a lot with those other things I mentioned, then maybe that remains your school. So, we're not all the same cookie in the United States. And that's, honestly, that's probably your hardest work right now.
Yes.
What schools are right for you?
Yeah, it's doing your research and looking up these colleges, looking up who teaches there, looking up the student organizations there, looking up what are the alumni, what do the graduates of these colleges do after the graduation. Like, this is all the research you have to do. And it's not necessarily that you will exclude certain things off the list, but you will cater your application based on what you think you can do in each one of these schools, because your experience will be completely different. And it's okay to say, hey, I haven't decided yet. I might want to be a doctor, or I might want to be a chemical, I don't know, researcher, right? Chemistry researcher. And that's totally fine, but you have to cater your application. So it's not like Santiago said at the very beginning, the same exact application that you submit to Harvard goes to Pitzer and Harvey Mudd and so on. That is a losing strategy. You have to make an individual application that plays to your strengths that are maximally aligned with what the college has to offer. All right, let's wrap this up because we're over time. If you guys have any other questions, send them to me and maybe we can do this offline. Santiago can maybe send me a couple of responses. Or actually you can contact him directly. His email is on the Pitzer's website. So do that, I guess, will be my suggestion. Yeah, thanks Santiago. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.